in all fairness, they say that trauma is something that is a concept that no matter how hard you try and recover from it, no matter how much progress you make, no matter how much you dedicate to your well being, your physical health, your mental health, your emotional health, your spiritual health, to your surroundings, to the people you interact with, no matter what you do, it's always going to stick with you. It's never going to leave. It's always going to be there. And I feel like after watching both of these movies back to back, yeah, I mean, I get the message. I understand it. You know, traumatic events are traumatizing. That's the bit. And I understand you can't run from your trauma. You just have to just deal with it. Right? You can't just bury it. You gotta heal with it. You gotta work with it. You gotta confront it. You gotta do something about it. You know, unfortunately, American society, even in 2024 to this day, has a very difficult problem with burying their emotions, burying their feelings, and simply, rather than taking the time to help heal it or confront it or, take charge with it whatsoever, we seem to be in this sort of systematic, sort of endless vicious cycle, this systematic loop, if you will, of intoxication, alcohol, drugs, sex, violence, gluttony, food, self-indulgence, and a lot of things that are just out there. So, this movie series has been flown under the radar for me for a little bit. Not gonna lie. Not because it's a bad movie series. Hell, the first one, by critics and audiences and fans worldwide, have said it's fantastic in every single way possible. But mostly because I just at first didn't have much of an interest to see this one. At first. I didn't have much of an interest to see, both the first movie and the second movie. I knew the first movie came out years ago. So, but I never bothered to see the second one. Simply because, I don't know, something about the premise seemed like it wasn't going to take the idea and the concept of traumatic events and trauma as a subject matter itself seriously, and rather it was only going to play it up for cheap horror gags and cliches and just special effects. No, I was wrong about this. I really was. I was horrifyingly wrong. So I finally decided, you know what? Well, the second one's coming out soon, and I never even bothered to watch the first one. So, me and the missus decided to watch the first one. Because why not? It's sure. Let's go with that. Just decided we want to watch it. And we did. We watched it on Hulu, actually, of all places. We would have thought that it would have been on other streaming services, and I think it is at the time of this recording, but, at the time, we have Hulu, so we just figured, why not? So we watched it. And The first movie is definitely nerve-wracking in both the best and, in some cases, worst way possible. Because I'm going to tell y'all right now, I agree 100% with both fan scores and critics and audiences alike. The first movie is fantastic in every single way. But there are some flaws. Let me explain those, because I'd rather get the flaws out of the way first than, kind of go into the onslaught of positives. So, right now, I'm going to tell you straight up, without a doubt, that in order for me personally, my personal taste, for a horror movie to work, I don't care necessarily about the actors themselves or actresses. I'm the type of person where I don't care who plays what in a film. If they put on a good performance as that character and what they're trying to portray, then they've done a good job, in my opinion. So, I've seen movies where you've had the goofiest of actors completely out of their element in a horror movie or action movie or a drama, and their performance really shines and shows you that, hey, this is a movie that's worth warranting a visit, and it's good. But I really do feel like, and this is where the first negative comes in, for the first movie, I feel like I really like the protagonist a lot. And the protagonist in this film is a lot smarter than we give her credit for. Especially because, something about the protagonist straight up, with her being a licensed therapist and psychiatrist, she works at a hospital, she has a PhD, she has actually a pretty decent house despite it being just a hand-me-down. And, she's got a car, she got a cat, she got a fiance. She's actually doing pretty well in her life, all things considering. But the surrounding cast, I feel like doesn't contribute much to the film other than just to kind of push her, each and every step past her breaking point. And I feel like that's a negative in my opinion, because it's one of those things where you should have a perfect balance between a side character or two in a horror film actually doing their best to help you and be an ally and be sort of like that sidekick and side character. But then you have other side characters who are also meant to be the sort of antagonist and want you to get, destroyed or blown up or murdered or, disemboweled or something, right? Especially in most horror movies, there's supposed to be this sort of variety blend of different characters to balance out the runtime. The main character does a fantastic job combating this cosmic horror, this entity, if you will, right? But I feel like the side characters don't really do a whole lot outside of just kind of oh, you're crazy, you're nuts, ghosts, spirits, spooks, metaphysical entities. Well, gee, I think you're just a little wackadoo. I think all of this is clearly because of the fact that, you're holding on to trauma from your past. right? That clearly, well, that makes you a bad person because you have trouble getting over your trauma, whereas we're enjoying our boring cookie cutter life, and why aren't you cookie cutter like us? And that's the second negative, is like, there really is such a like, there's an issue where you can actually make your protagonist a little too strong, if you will. And sometimes, for a horror movie especially, something like this, where the intent is the jump scares, the scare factor, the eerie, scenes, the music, and even in this particular case, the gore factor, right? The morbid, detailed gore factor. You need to have the protagonist be balanced, and that's kind of where like my final negative comes in. I feel like the protagonist herself in the first film, and there's a reason why I'm avoiding saying the name of characters for both 1 and 2, is because there's a reason. I'll explain that here when I talk about the second film. I feel like the main protagonist needed to be nerfed a little bit. Just a bit. Just a bit. Because it almost seems like everything from a very logical standpoint of who this character is, the main protagonist, what they witnessed, what they saw at their job, what's going on with them, how they're figuring out what this entity and metaphysical, we'll call it demon in loose words for now, is, and the conclusion of how she's getting to this point and trying to prevent herself from doing something too drastic, all makes sense, right? Like, this all comes from a very smart analytical standpoint, especially because, and I'm trying to avoid spoilers because I try not to do that for these types of things, which is why I'm talking the way I am, a specific way. But like, I want to say about maybe close to the end of the second act, the third act, the film kind of briefly turns into like a crime scene action kind of film, like an investigation kind of film, which works, but like, she's not a cop. She's a psychiatrist. She's a therapist, right? She's not really a journalist or a police officer. So like, it kind of takes me out of it a little bit that, I don't know, she's handling all of this really in a logical, smart way. But like, it just seems like none of it's working. And I almost feel like the demon, in quotations, is a little too powerful, in my opinion. Like, again, there needs to be a balance scale. Like, the demon needs to be nerfed a little, and then the protags need to be nerfed a little too, for this idea to work. At least, on a more perfected scale. Having that been said, though, oh my god. The eeriness of the movie is fantastic. The music score is fantastic. The protagonist herself, despite everything I just said, is a fantastic protagonist. It has been a while since I have watched a horror movie where I've actually rooted for the protagonist and be like, no, you know what? This all makes logical fucking sense. What you're doing and how you're approaching all this should work. And you know what? Considering, you had, important person in your life die, you had a patient die, You had your little furry one die. You had a falling out with your sister. Your life is kind of not stable, and you're finally doing something kind of about it in the film and trying to get yourself back to normal, and you're actually reaching out for help from all the people you thought you were close to, but the side characters make it so annoying because it's like, listen to her. So, great protagonist, great concept, great music, excellent cinematography. There are a lot of scenes in the first film that are really just dense in atmosphere and are just very eerie, very dark, very slow paced. And even some of the scenes that are a little fast paced, they let you know that no, what's going on with this demon in quotations is still happening. It's still there. It's playing as many mind games as possible on the main protagonist, on her, to get her to expire. Again, I have to say things a certain way because YouTube's algorithm and the way YouTube does things will immediately blacklist you and like shadow ban you for even remotely saying a certain thing. So, or implying a certain thing. So, to prevent her from expiring, let's call it that. To prevent her expiration. There we go. I think expiration is an appropriate word. For God's sakes, YouTube. And for God's sake, social media. But like, the entity itself, again, demon, is horrifying, is gruesome, is powerful, is one disturbing, creepy, just twisted fuck. That's, there's no other word to say, just a twisted fuck. And the rules of how this all works is interesting. So, because it's like, and this part I can talk about because it's in the trailers and stuff. How it works is the demon feasts off of trauma. Feasts off of the energy of traumatic people and their traumatic events. It doesn't feast specifically off of depression or anxiety or anger or actual usual emotions that most people have. It feasts off of trauma. So, with that in mind, it wants to fester in your mind and feed off of all the traumatic events and things you've seen in your life so that it can push you more and more and more to the point of you expiring, if you will, self-expiring, self-expiration, if you will. Again, gotta be brand friendly. So, but like, it's a really, 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 really good concept for a demon, an entity, if you will. Because it's like, this thing, up until the very end of the movie, you think you've got this all figured out along with the protagonist, and you have a way to, like, deal with this. And being a licensed therapist and a psychiatrist, she thought, okay, what better way to deal with this than to deal with this head on and acknowledge my trauma, acknowledge it's there, be in control of my own mind and my own trauma, and actually confront and battle this thing. And she tries, to be fair. She tries to, like, slam a door shut on this thing, combat this thing a little bit, and even try and light this fucker on fire. Right? But, like, that all doesn't work. Because, as established, and this thing is in your mind. It's in your brain. It is in your cerebral cortex. It is in your it's in there. It's in your brain. So it has the ability to quite literally fabricate reality and warp your perception of reality physically. Yeah. It's a lot. And the way this thing, and I won't spoil the ending, gets to you and, like, gets inside you is gruesome, horrifying, violent, and something I would expect out of, like, a 3 a.m., like, nightmare fuel-induced, like, MTV Adult Swim era, like, horror fest. Right? This is something that will keep you up at night. But that's the thing about the first film. Lots of thrills. And some chills here and there. But I gotta be honest, at the end of the day, the first one didn't scare me as much. Mostly because I was more curious about the protagonist, the side characters, the world building, how this entity and demon works, how it feasts off of trauma. It was kind of establishing its environment for the first film, which is actually kind of smart to do for a horror film. If you know you're going to make more than one of these things, or potentially one of these things, then, a little world building and exposition, at least done organically, naturally, the way this one does, works. And that's the thing. Smile 1. You're not there necessarily for the chills factor. You're in it for the eeriness. You're in it for the thrills. You're in it for the unnerving, unsettled uneasiness of it. And it's good. It's really good. But man, had a few things been tweaked and the power scale has been a little more balanced between the demon and the protagonist, I would have made this a perfect movie. It's not a perfect movie, but it's definitely high up there. And again, we don't rank films on this series. We don't. That's not how this works. But if I were to give you a comparison, this would be like really high up there as far as the enjoyment factor. So I would give it a hypothetical score of like really high up there, right? And I would watch this again probably every Halloween at this point. Every spooky month, if you were, every HalloWeird. So It's a lot. It's a lot. And all things considering, with what happens in the second one, oh, the second one is all chills. It is all chills. We'll be back with the second one. Welcome back. We're talking about Smile 2, the second one. Now, we just got done talking about the first one, right? And overall, for it being the thrill factor that it is and setting up how the premise and the world building and the demon / entity and how this all works, it's a fantastic film. But the second one, oh man, it is. There's a lot to compress with the second one. So let's give it a go. Kinda. I guess. So, immediately you can tell with Smile 2 is that Smile 2 is one of those things that really said, let's take a little bit of the world building from the first movie. Let's take the eeriness, the jump scares, and the gore factor and crank all of that up like 100% more. And you would think, okay, so the first one definitely is more about like presenting the concept of how it's tackling drama and how it's tackling like the drama that comes from traumatic events and how it can fester and represent a sort of darkness, an entity to people, right? The second one says, no, we're really going to show you how even a high-functioning, person like a pop singer who's already, like, had a much worse, like, more destructive life, even beforehand, how we could break their psyche even more. Now, just like with the first one, I'm going to say the negatives right out the way, and then I'm going to jump into the positives. A lot of people online right now are bashing over the fact that they didn't like this one as much because it dealt with a pop singer type character, who, goes on stage, plays music, performs, is super wildly popular, and you can already kind of guess the ending as to how this is probably going to pay off, considering it's a horror film, considering it's a direct sequel of the first Smile movie, and the first Smile movie had a very, very horrifying, unique ending to it. So for this one to work, it's going to have a somewhat similar ending or something just as powerful, if not more, in order to warrant it doing, say, possibly a prequel or a third one or, a Netflix series or some crap, right? But, like, how do I put this? I don't have a problem with the idea of them using a pop singer for the main protag. And I know the internet absolutely hates this, right? Because they're like, oh man, this protag is not as believable or powerful or strong or, doesn't have their wits compared to, say, the first one. Well, here's my counter argument to that. I argue that with the first Smile movie, right, that you had someone who is relatively all there for the most part and pretty psychologically, mentally, emotionally, and even physically aware of what was happening and trying to actually get help and trying to actually reach out to people and do something about it. The whole point of the sequel is to show it from a different perspective and show you that, hey, this is someone who doesn't reach out to much people or little to anyone at all, doesn't like their own parent, in quote. I don't know what happened to the dad. I guess he just, I don't know, he lives in a farm in Kentucky, I guess, whatever. But like, she's already like unstable, right? She's already like, not fully, completely there mentally, physically, emotionally, and even just metaphysically, right? Like, this girl takes stuff. This girl's on medication. She used to drink. She's a pop singer. They play up all the tropes of, bad habits and addictions and stuff like that. And it's sprinkled throughout the film. But you also do see her in this state of like trying to get her act together, trying to be healthier, trying to be, more responsible and doing this tour that she's on with her mom and with her stage managers and coach and all these people, right? And the pressure is building. So, of course, the demon / entity is going to latch onto this and be like, yes, the perfect candidate. Now, what's interesting, though, about Smile 2 is that it doesn't even start off, technically, about the pop singer, right? Because the pop singer and her story takes up, like, a good majority of the film. But there's actually something unique that Smile 2 does. Smile 2 actually does this thing where, at the very beginning of the movie, and I'm not going to get into the exact details because I don't want to ruin how this all connects. But they actually do something kind of unique in where they take a character from the first film who technically now also is aware of the process, the mechanics of how this entity / demon works and the rules that it abides by, how the traumatic event thing works. So this character goes out in the middle of some snowy, I don't know, backwoods area and tries to bust a drug deal, if you will. Because, the character's a cop. And the character actually tries to pass on the traumatic event, and we'll call it in quotations the curse, onto another person per the rules of how the world building goes. So, and I don't think I said this in part 1 with the first movie, but basically how it works is, and this isn't a spoiler, so this is something that even I had trouble figuring out, so I'd rather going in how this works, because this is useful information. How this works is, once the person expires, let's keep saying that, there's 2 options. Either they can expire themselves and the chain is broken completely, right? Like 100%, they expire themselves before the entity has a chance to possess the person, or they have the option of passing the trauma onto someone by you know, harming and expiring someone else, right? But there has to be a witness. And that witness is the one that inherits the trauma from viewing and seeing the event unfold. So that means there's 3 people have to be involved. The person who has the trauma, the person who's about to expire, and then a third person who now witnesses the traumatic event unfolding, thus having the trauma. So basically, it's a sacrifice ritual, in a sense. Now, here's the problem. The cop character, if we're backtracking a little bit, right? Beginning of the film, goes to expire a person and tries to have the other person be the traumatic E who's about to receive the trauma, but then he gets shot and then he dies. So now there's nobody who, you know, witnessed the traumatic event, thus rendering the expired person pointless, and now he's still stuck with the curse until someone shows up at the last moment and actually witnessed the whole thing, and now it's been transferred. Ish. But yet, there's another thing that happens where the cop character also expires. I'm not going to say how, because it's a spoiler, but they expire, and that kicks off the sequel. Because now, how they expired and what the cause of that was is what kicks off this whole thing with the pop singer for the sequel. Now, this is where the first negative comes in. I feel like, and I understand that this is the sequel now, and I understand that in order for this entity and this demon to possess people, right, there's a certain pattern, there's certain rules. It's like an infection at this point, right? It's like an infestation, like a parasite, right? I feel like explaining the rules of how this all works should have definitely had more of an emphasis in the sequel, instead of just doing the first movie again, but gorier, scarier, and more violent. That's my first negative. I'm not asking for it to be entirely spelled out, but I am asking for a little more breadcrumbs as to how this all works. Because if you're expecting us as an audience to follow along, right, and understand how this curse works, right, then it needs to be a little bit better communicated. I got the gist of it with the sequel, and I understood a good chunk of it in the first one. But since this being the sequel and a bigger budget, you could have used that budget to sort of, I don't know, I hate to say this, but do a lore drop or some shit. You know? So, the second negative is this. The pop singer angle did work. And I liked the pop singer. And I even liked that they kind of specifically called out that, yes, this pop singer has addiction problems, has, you know, body problems, have image problems, has, like, you know, social problems, all these things mentally and physically. But, like, I feel as if playing into the cliches of a pop singer being traumatized doesn't hit as strong compared to, say, the first one. It still works. Do not get me wrong. And I still liked it because it was a different perspective. But again, small nitpick rather. I just feel like it could have done things a little bit more creatively with the writing for this character. Because this was, and here's where my final negative comes in. This is where I felt bad for the side characters. And, like, the side characters actually did, throughout all the movies, show a lot of deep concern for the protagonist. And actually, like, went out of their way to help them and accommodate them and, like, make sure they're okay. And, like, really sort of actually care. Whereas the protag in this one was just, I didn't want them to be as bratty. I understand, again, it works for the story you're telling, especially if you go see the film, but, like, just, I guess, falling into this sort of, like, she's a pop star, so she's gonna be an egomaniac, and she's already gonna be crazy, and she's not gonna have any personality to her, and yada yada. You get it? It's a satire on pop culture. Ha 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 ha. Pop singers are dumb. Ha 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 ha. Kill them all. Ha 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 ha. Like, I don't know. That felt like that was the angle in this film. And it got annoying. Real quick. Especially because I actually cared about the pop singer and the protag in this one. I wanted them to get their act together and get better. And I wanted them to, like, acknowledge everything and, like, actually, like, be a better human being. But, again, I also do like her in the sense that they went with a different perspective compared to the first one. Now on to the positives. The gore factor is completely ramped up in this. Like, if you thought the first movie was not gory, oh man, this definitely pushes the hard R in the sequel. There is a lot of dismemberment, body parts, gore, guts, wounds, fatal arteries. Like, this really does push the special effects and the just how bloody and violent in the most creative ways this film is. And that shoots up a big bonus point for me, because the first one was all about the thrills, right? The tension, the eeriness, the unsettlingness of the first one. The second one is about the carnage, the destruction, the chaos, the blood, the violence of it all, and how violent a traumatic event in a person's life or their traumatic past really can be, right? Versus the first one, where the traumatic events are more based on emotional depth and eeriness and being scared and being, sheltered and running away from a problem. Whereas this one is more about the destruction of everything. And I like that a lot, because it shines through despite the writing in how some of the characters act. The music is just as eerie. The Directing is really good, just like the first one. I don't know if I said that in part one, but the directing is also really good too. The side characters actually do have more depth to them in this one. Like, I felt bad for the parent character. I felt bad for the best friend. I felt bad for even, like, the stagecoaches and stuff. Even they were just like, hey, yo, what the fuck? So, even security was like, this is not normal. This girl's a little, you know. So, but I also like how this one does also take time to establish, again, some world building, just like the first one does, but it does in a way where it's only there to push the plot forward a tiny bit in order to get to the ending. Because the problem is, here's where that one negative or from earlier comes in for this one. I don't mind having to piece together your world building and how everything works. I don't mind that at all. But do it in a way that feels organic and not as forced. Because really, what the end of the second and the third act is you introduce this new character who's been texting the pop star character this whole time throughout the film, and they finally meet at the end of like the second act, about to hit the third act, and the guy's all like, yeah, well, my brother died because of he took a crowbar and unhinged his jaw, and he had the curse, and so I figured out a way to stop the curse physically this time, and if we do this and slow your heart rate down just enough and put you, in a freezer in an abandoned Pizza Hut, which, yes, that's an actual line and bit in the movie. I'm sure Pizza Hut's quite happy to know about their... Look, this is what happens when you try and out-pizza the Hut. They will throw your ass in the freezer and they will stop your heart. No, but in all seriousness, like, for real, they had a good setup for the third act, and it goes pretty well up until you forget, oh yeah, this thing controls your mind too. It can warp your reality just like the first one. How does it do it in this one? And you really do kind of believe that the protag, the pop singer, actually does try and, like, kill this thing, right? And it's dead, it's gone, but, like, again, fake out ending. And then the real ending kicks in. Now, normally, I'm not a fan of fake out endings. I feel like they're cheap, lazy, and overdone. But this is the one time that it actually works in its favor, which is a rare positive. Because the fake out ending and it leading up very eerily and in a fun transition to the real ending is absolutely intense. Right? Like, remember when I said they cranked up the gore factor from like here's the first film, right? And the gore factor's maybe at like, I'm going to say like a good 40%, right? With maybe like the eeriness, the thrills, and the chills, and the jump scares, and the ambiance, higher up at about maybe like, 80-90%. Here, in the second one, right, in this one, They took the gore and cranked it all the way up to here, especially with the ending past my monitor. And the eeriness, the uncomfortableness, that ambiance that you got in the first one, that's like right about here. It's there, but it's like compared to this, oh man, this was just a bloodfest. And the ending, oh man. Let me tell you, if they make a proper third movie, right, and explain how the third movie sort of ties everything together, I'm very excited to see the third one, if they make a third one, which I hope they do. But I kind of also agree with a couple people online as well, too, as well as much more popular, people online. They should make a prequel to the first and second one. Kind of use the prequel as sort of the world building thing. Use the prequel as sort of the, hey, here's all the lore. Here's how this all works. Here's how this all happened. Here's how this all manifested. Here's who this creature is. Here's who they are. Like, let's dedicate a whole movie just to, like, lore dumping. Right? Do that. Do a prequel movie that's just all lore dumping. And then when you make the third film, make it the most messed up, twisted, psychological, untethered, and unhinged film possible. And say you have to actually kill off the demon/entity this time, right? Do it in a way that's so glorious and so powerful and insane that it feels like a victory. And tie it all into mental health awareness. Make it a message about mental health awareness and the psychology of mental health and how mental health physically, emotionally, spiritually, and metaphysically impacts your body. If you can somehow, with the third film, cap this whole franchise off with a positive mental health awareness message, then this will probably be one of the best film trilogies of all time. Hands down. You have the pieces. You have the puzzle pieces. You have the Legos. You have the instructions. You even have the budget, clearly, because it's Paramount and Viacom. Use it. And just put everything together. Right? And just piece it all together. And just do all that. And you're good. And if you do that, then yeah, this will be a fantastic series. But as the movie stands on its own, though, for a sequel, it's really fucking good. Like, I like the second one just as much as the first one, but I'm also going to say something controversial and kind of unpopular. I like the second one more. I like the second one more because now that I've seen the first one and then the second one, I appreciate the first one for what it does a lot more, and it's sort of like uneery, sort of spaced out kind of passiveness. But the second one is just a complete splatterfest. And man, it's been a while since a movie. I'm not kidding you, by the way. Thanks to Cinergy, I went to go to a special slasher screening of this film at 10 p.m. at night. They had movie trivia, they had snacks, they had a little gift prize that you could, have a little toy novelty. I had this pair of like lips that I basically had, right? And it was cool, like these wax lips. And I'm not kidding you when I say with the second one, I got out of the film at 1 o'clock in the morning. I didn't get home until about 2. I didn't fall asleep until about 5 in the morning. It kept me up. It's been a long time since a horror movie shook me and kept me up. Yeah. Anyhow, go see it. Go see the second one. Go watch the first one. It's on Paramount Plus. It's on Hulu. It's on whatever streaming platform you could rent it or buy it on. And then go watch the second one. And special thanks to Cinergy Entertainment and my ongoing partnership with Cinergy for inviting me out for the slasher screening of Smile 2. Because, well, I'll tell you this much. The movie definitely does give you something to smile about. All right, bye.